Welcome back to a brand new edition of Views from the Booth. I am your host, Reed Becker. And joining me today, you have, he's a contributor to fansided.com, Brett Chaves. You have CJ Medeiros, who has his own website, cjspatriotsopinions.com. And then you have Ben Pope, who has his own podcast, is First and Goal, Dean Gridiron Talk. So first, guys, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thanks for having us, Reed.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure.
No problem.
Always, man.
So let's get right into it. We have the NFL, we have the playoffs coming up this upcoming weekend, but in terms of the NFL, first we have to get right to the Philadelphia Eagles because Doug Peterson lit a fire into the NFL this weekend. So he puts in the third string quarterback in the fourth quarter in a 3-point game. Meanwhile, this game is on national television and it has big-time playoff implications. What is Doug Peterson doing? And by the way, he says he's just trying to get the third stringer a look. Meanwhile, the guy hasn't played all year. You can't, in my opinion, Doug Peterson crossed the line here. There's a difference between putting the players out in a week's advance when that's for teams basically that where they have a playoff spot locked up. In this case, they didn't, but they should be playing for pride. I think he just crossed the line there. You have to, you basically, they're not going to say it, but you basically gave Washington the division once he just took it out, and all the players knew it. And then I just want to say something about in terms of the Giants' perspective. I understand why the Giants are upset, although they had their own opportunities as well to get their own win, in addition, where they didn't have to worry about another team. But I'm not surprised that the Eagles, in this case, did this to the Giants because, I mean, the Eagles hate the Giants just as much as the Giants hate them. And honestly, I think the Eagles just did this because they only care about themselves. They don't really care about what the other teams or what the league thinks, but I think they were way off here.
I would have to agree. Taking out your future franchise quarterback in Jalen Hurts might be the biggest blunder I've seen this season. I mean, just seeing the physical difference on the field between Carson Wentz, who was pretty much mediocre all season and didn't really do anything, and then you go ahead and put in Jalen Hurts, who actually gives this team hope. I mean, you see guys like Alshon Jeffrey, Jalen Reagor, Deshaun Jackson. I mean, the list goes on, with some of the guys that they have who haven't really been present all season. All of a sudden, Hurts comes in and he makes them alive. So I definitely think taking Jalen Hurts out is kind of a dagger to the heart, so to speak, and kind of takes the spirit away from this team. The only reason why I would physically see them sort of making this move or making some sort of sense is just for a draft pick.
Right.
They have a top 10 pick now and maybe just to move up a couple spots. But to me, this still doesn't make any sense regardless of what they did or how they did it. So if it was me and I was Doug Peterson, you keep Jalen Hurts and you give him the valuable minutes that, a national televised primetime game has.
The other thing that I was just quickly thinking of, could it also be that he was just trying to stick it to Carson Wentz, who was inactive for that game, and you have Chris Mortensen reporting that the relationship between him and Peterson's fractured. So could that have been saying, all right, you're inactive, I'm just going to go to the third string because I have more faith in him than you, Carson Wentz. That was just something that crossed my mind when he did that.
No, Brett, I think Brett hit it right on the nail on the head where he said that might have been one of the biggest blunders of the year. Doug Peterson has been responsible for most of the big blunders of the year, not even going to lie. If you remember against the Seahawks game, he brought in Jalen Hurts for one snap, one throw for 3 yards to Alshon Jeffrey, and then put back in Carson Wentz, who completely obliterated himself once again. Owner Jeffrey Lurie, pretty much, I don't see how this man keeps around Doug Peterson for another season. He ruined the relationship he had with Carson Wentz after they signed that big extension with him. And Wentz, at the end of the game, Wentz, Zach Ertz, and Jason Kelce were at the edge of the field kind of just standing around admiring things because, honestly, that's probably the last time those three are going to be on the field together as Eagles teammates. I don't think it's going to happen again. And you talk about Wentz's relationship with Peterson being ruined. how does that strengthen Hurts' relationship, him being taken out in a game where, at least in my opinion, I think he would have won. I think he wasn't playing that great against a strong D-line that Washington has, but Jalen Hurts has shown a lot of promise this season, and I think he would have found at least a way to get in the end zone one more time to take the dub. But
Yeah, it's possible. And like Brett said, I think they just did it to get a better pick. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but Philly was already eliminated.
Yeah.
So, so I guess you can bring up the case of playing for pride. However, there is one other thing, which I'm sure you've all heard. The players were none too pleased. In fact, two defensive players whose names I don't think have been released yet actually had to be held back from attacking Doug Peterson.
Right.
So I don't think he's just lost his relationship with Carson Wentz. I dare say he's lost his relationship with the entire locker room. And there's a guy I work with, a media personality, you may have heard of him, Mark Gray, who fully documented that Jeffrey Lurie, the Eagles owner, is not a fan of change. He does not like change, which is why they rarely change head coaches, and which is probably the only reason why Roseman and Peterson are still saying. But if by some miracle Lurie hears this, you have to know this. If you have any respect for the players in your locker room, you will get rid of Doug Peterson. Doug Peterson is holding this team back.
I agree. Now, the other question is, staying on the Doug Peterson point, you have people all around the league, first of all, are just destroying him and the whole franchise. I mean, Chris Mortensen, Sal Palantonio, Seth Joyner, who even played for the Eagles, was embarrassed, to say the least. So the point is, do you think going forward, though, are players going to not sign in free agent and go to the Eagles in free agency because of this? Because we're already saying that he already ruined the locker room chemistry or culture there down in Philly. So could free agents, I guess, look away from Philly going forward because of, as long as Doug Peterson is still the head coach?
I think it's
very
definitely going to be.
possible.
Yeah, I definitely think it's going to be a factor. I don't think it's going to be anything that completely turns someone away from signing with the Eagles, but it's something you always think about when in free agent talks. So
Yeah, and when you think of free agency and teams like this where you've just lost the locker room and you have an organization that's fighting amongst itself, you have to remember same thing happened with Jacksonville, and the NFL Players Association actually has stepped in and warned free agents away. And now I don't see the Players Association doing that now, but I think it's very possible that players look at this and say, no, I don't want to go there. Or if you're Philly, you can pull a Cincinnati, who, in case you don't remember, in the offseason, signed guys like DJ Reader and Trey Waynes, two decent players, but they massively overpaid them. And I think overpay would be the one way that you can get somebody to Philly. That's probably what they've locked themselves into.
So if I can just chime in here, just looking at the sheet right now, Philadelphia Eagles are not in a good spot as far as cap space. With all of the big names that they have, they're going to have to sacrifice at least one or two of them, because right now they're in debt almost $75 million in cap space, which is very, very, very tough to come from. And just looking at this scenario, if you want to bring in guys, you're going to have to let guys go like Zach Ertz, Carson Wentz. Even if you're going to take on that dead cap, it's going to be tough.
Well, so here's the question now with Carson Wentz then, because as we said, the relationship's basically fractured there. So now he has that big contract that you were just mentioning. I think it's going to be tough for them to get rid of him, though. I don't see a team really willing to take on that contract. The only team that has come to mind would be the Colts, and that would probably only be because, I mean, we don't know what Phillip Rivers is going to do in free agency, he could just retire. But Frank Reich, who was the offensive coordinator in Philly with Carson Wentz, is out there. That's the only team that I think would be willing to take him on right now. I think his contract's going to be a problem to get rid of.
Or they can do what Jacksonville did with Nick Foles. You're going to probably have to make Wentz nullify a large portion of that contract in order to make him somewhat movable.
They're going to have to restructure it somehow, like CJ said. He's going to have to nullify something. They're going to have to make something work, Because if you want to get rid of a contract like that, not only are you taking on all that dead cap, you are literally making yourself so unattractive that you're not going to be able to find a trade partner in any sort of form. So if you want to deal Carson Wentz or just any one of these guys, you're going to have to restructure something because they've put themselves in a hole that's very tough to dig from.
Or could he just say, because if I'm not mistaken, didn't he just sign an extension that goes into effect the next year? So in that case, if he's wanting out right now, the owner should just say, well, all right, well then take back your extension. We're not going to be able to get you out of here without getting rid of that contract because you signed it. So I think Carson Wentz, yeah, I agree. He's going to have to definitely work out that contract with them. All right, so that's the Eagles, and we talked about Doug Peterson should be the fall guy, but I don't see him stay. I think he's going to stay. I think that the front office has already acknowledged that a little bit, but it's definitely going to be an interesting offseason in Philadelphia. But let's move forward because Wild Card Weekend is this upcoming Saturday and Sunday. Let's start off with the Colts and Buffalo Bills. So for this game, to me, Buffalo is the second best team in the AFC after Kansas City. I don't see how, and by the way, the state of New York is going to be allowing some fans into the building that day with the Bills. But I don't see how the Bills will lose this game. To me, the Colts have been a little up and down this year. I don't see the Bills losing at home and the way they've been playing. I mean, they destroyed the Dolphins just this past weekend. So
yeah, there's no reason that Buffalo should lose this game. Maybe and this is no disrespect to Phillip Rivers, I think he's done a pretty good job from where my expectations were at the beginning of the season. I think he's been pretty solid for them. But Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs provide a different element than anything that the Colts are able to provide. The closest thing that they have on the offensive side of the ball is Jonathan Taylor. And Jonathan Taylor is great. He went for over 250 yards last week, but it was against the Jaguars. So you take what you can get. But Diggs and Allen have been on a different planet. Their connection has been elite this past year. And you could argue that both of them are in the MVP conversation just for the regular season. But I think Buffalo's defense has been playing pretty solid. A bunch of people can say that, they're a Hail Mary away from being 8-0 in their past 8 games. But Buffalo might be – you can argue that Kansas City is still the top dog, and they've been playing a little wishy-washy, and we're probably going to talk about that in a little bit. But Buffalo's right up there with them. They have been playing out of their minds recently, and I see no reason that they lose this game.
I agree. And just going along with what you said a little bit earlier about Rivers, seeing what he's done over his career, I think we've pretty much seen the ceiling for Phillip Rivers. You know, this might be his last season, not only as a Colt, but as a quarterback in the NFL. So he hasn't really gotten past the AFC Championship. I mean, we'll face it. I mean, even with Antonio Gates and, the guys alike, he hasn't managed to get past Tom Brady when he was in New England. So I don't see him doing anything further, especially where he's at in his career. We've seen the ceiling that he has, and seeing where the Colts are at right now as far as their situation on offense, having a young running back who, yes, has been good, but no playoff experience. You have a still pretty young wide receiver core besides T.Y. Hilton, and their defense is still growing a little bit despite seeing a lot of promise. So going up against this elite team in Buffalo, who in my personal opinion might even go to the Super Bowl, I think they have the best chance of beating the Chiefs out of anyone. So I don't see how Buffalo loses this game. If they do, it might be the biggest upset in the offseason, in the postseason, I should say.
Yeah, you're right. And when you look at Indy's team, the only thing that should scare Buffalo is the defense. I mean, with guys like Justin Houston, DeForest Buckner, Darius Leonard, Kenny Moore, and Xavier Rhodes. But, Buffalo also is a pretty good defense. So which means you got to look at the offense. And look, just by Stephon Diggs alone, that puts Buffalo well over the top. But when you couple that with Josh Allen's progress, and in fact, you also have guys like Dawson Knox and Cole Beasley, who have also taken big steps, it just doesn't look good for Indy. I don't think that offensively they can keep up. if the game happens to become a shootout, which you know they're not going to keep up, and I do not see Indy's defense containing Stephon Diggs for an entire 4 quarters. So mark me down for a Buffalo victory.
All right, I think it's safe to say we all agree here. So let's move forward. The Rams heading to Seattle on Saturday, 4:40 on Fox. So this game, right away for the Rams, I mean, Jared Goff's coming off thumb surgery and his status is still up in the air for this game. I don't see how any way, even if Goff does come back, but let's just assume for right now that he's not coming back, Seattle's going to cruise in this game. I'm not going to go against Russell Wilson this week against a Rams team that's been very shaky this season. I mean, they lost to the Jets, for crying out loud. So, I mean, I'm not going to go against Russell Wilson. Even if Jared Goff comes back, I'm still taking Seattle. I mean, Jamal Adams, I know their defense has been a little shaky for Seattle's sake, but with their offense with Seattle, I'm not going against that.
To me, this conversation as far as Goff goes, I think it should be a legit conversation on whether or not you should start Goff or Walford. Even if we assume that Jared Goff could play, I think John Walford actually has a shot to play in this game, regardless of injury or not. Yes, Jared Goff has that big game experience. He's been to the Super Bowl before. But Jared Goff this season, no bueno. 20-13 touchdown interception ratio and 17 turnovers in 15 games. For fifth-year QB, I don't see that as pretty good. I mean, that's not the best way you want to go out for your starting quarterback who you drafted first overall back a few years ago. So John Walford has a chance.
But you're going to give him that game coming. He played that was his first game this past Sunday. And you're going to just put him up there in the playoffs?
To me, potentially. If you're going to put in a potentially injury risk Jared Goff, who obviously has been shaky this season, I wouldn't see why not. I mean, yes, it is a different take and a bolder take, but John Walford has shown, he can hang in there when the take's on the line.
It was one game.
Regardless of it is one game, but still, it did have playoff implications as well. So, in my eyes, John Walford has a potential to start. Should he start over Goff? I don't know. That's up to Sean McVay, but he should be in that conversation.
Yeah, and what you have to remember is that it was one game and a game against the vastly inferior when compared to Seattle, Arizona Cardinals. Now, for me, I'm a defensive guy, and I look at this Rams defense, and, you have some good pieces, Aaron Donald, John Johnson, Jalen Ramsey, who made DK Metcalf his son. But you have to remember, you have Tyler Lockett on the other side of that field as well, and Russ, I hate to tell you, for any other fans, is starting to cook again. And you have to consider Seattle's defense. And yes, I know they're not that good, but have you noticed the giant step they've taken ever since they've traded for Carlos Dunlap? Dunlap has rejuvenated them. Jamal Adams is playing well, and he's come back. And I believe he's got over 8 sacks, as a DB. And I honestly wouldn't sleep on Seattle's defense, even though statistically they're not great. But over these past few weeks, they've been playing very well. And when you couple that with Wolford, who might play, I don't know. I just don't see Wolford beating a team of Seattle's caliber. But you can say, like, oh yeah, they beat Arizona. But let's face it, Seattle is better than Arizona. And when you couple that with Wolford having no playoff experience, it just doesn't bode well for the Rams.
Yeah, I respect Sean McVay. I respect everyone on that Rams defense. They might be the best unit in the league just in general on defense. But the fact that this is even a conversation between who should start if they're both healthy, Jared Goff versus John Wolford, it just makes me go in Seattle's favor. I understand that their offense, honestly, in the second half of the season has not been as good as they were in the first half. They have taken some major steps back. Russell Wilson has not been the MVP candidate that he was in the first half. He has been not bad, but he's been mediocre. And mediocrity is not going to do you very much in the playoffs. Luckily, they might be facing John Wolford on the other side, so maybe they skate through this game. But if I see any progress from the offense side on Seattle's behalf, so if I see Russell Wilson and DK Metcalf, Chris Carson, who hasn't gone over 100 yards in a single game this season, which shocks me since he's gone 12 times over 100 yards in the past 2 seasons combined. That just shows that something's a little bit off with the Seattle offense. It's not what we've seen even earlier in the season. If they show any signs of life in this game against the Rams, they're going to be moving heavily up, and whether they can, in my mind at least, possibly make it even to the Super Bowl. But right now, for this game itself, I'm taking Seattle, no doubt.
All right, we agree on that one. We'll get to the NFC best team a little later. But moving on right ahead to Tampa Bay at Washington, the primetime game Saturday night. For this game, Washington, to me, is too young of a team. First of all, they played in the NFC East, which was the worst division in football. And you're going up against Tom Brady. Granted, it's not the Patriots, and it's a different team the way it's built. I still am taking Tom Brady in this game. It's the playoffs, and I'm not going to go against Tom Brady, even on Tampa Bay, because especially now that it's this young, inexperienced Washington team. Alex Smith, as well as he's been playing, he's still pretty fragile. I mean, just the way you see him moving around because of, his leg. We all know what happened there. But Washington's just too young of a team. The Tom Brady's weapons that he has is way too explosive. And, Tampa Bay's defense, while it's not, I guess, the best, it's pretty solid. And if you go back to last year, it was their defense that kept them in, and I think that's going to do the same here.
So for me, I'm definitely agreeing with you, Reed. I definitely think you should take Tom Brady here. This is Brady's forte in the postseason, and he's got loads and loads of weapons to choose from Godwin to AB to Ronald Jones, who's now back in the lineup with Fournette. I don't see how Washington wins this game. Like you said, they played in the worst division in football, and
Granted,
their secondary
still.
It is still. Their secondary is not the greatest right now. Landon Collins on IR still hasn't been even there all season. And even though you have one of the youngest defensive lines in football with the most potential, none of them have playoff experience besides Ryan Kerrigan and maybe a few other guys. But I just don't see how you go up against Tom Brady in this offense.
Yeah, and there is one other thing. I don't know if it would impact the game as much as I'd like to believe, but consider this. What happens when teams trash talk Tom Brady? That's bulletin board material for Brady. And you have to remember, Chase Young after the game's like, I'm coming, I want Tom Brady. It's like, will people ever learn not to give Tom Brady bulletin board material? And when you look at the team surrounding Chase Young, it's just not a good team. On offense, outside of the inconsistent Antonio Gibson and Terry McLaurin, you don't really have much going for you. And Tampa's defense, like you guys alluded to, is that can get the job done. Not the flashiest unit, but still can. And there's no bones about it. Tampa is going to smoke them.
Yeah, so I honestly would have given Washington a little better shot with the recent injury, the quad injury that Mike Evans suffered against the Falcons this weekend. But just thinking about it going into the matchup just a little bit, as soon as you hear that or think about the previous few games where Antonio Gibson is just returning just 2 weeks ago from a turf toe injury, he is still not fully recovered from that. Terry McLaurin suffered a high ankle sprain 2 weeks ago, and he barely played. He didn't play as many snaps as he usually does against the Eagles. He did play because it was for division, obviously. He was going to play. And Alex Smith is not 100%. So those are 3 of your best offensive weapons on the football team side of things. And even if you do think the football team's defense can hold Brady to a couple scores, keep the football team offense in the game, it's not really going to matter. I don't think the football team has enough firepower on this offense, and the injuries on the offense doesn't help it either. I'm taking Tampa, and I'm going to lean with Tom Brady, even though I still do have some significant concerns about what Arians is doing with Brady. I understand that they've blown up the last 3 games, but let's understand this. They played the Falcons twice and then the Lions. They're going to destroy those teams regardless. That's why I kind of had them low in any power rankings that I've done, but they're still a very dangerous team with Tom Brady and all the weapons that he's had, and Antonio Brown being unlocked this weekend as well. So we'll have to see on that.
That Atlanta game was pretty close. I mean, I guess both times they played Atlanta, they kind of were. It was pretty even. I mean, of course, you have to have Atlanta choke at the end because that's what Atlanta, the city, is known for. But that specifically was kind of close even. But yeah, I agree totally that they're going to destroy Washington. So moving to Sunday's slate of games, you have first off the Ravens heading out to Tennessee. For this game, I think Tennessee is going to win this game. First of all, Tennessee beat Baltimore just this past season. Granted, it went to overtime, but you have that. And let's not forget that Tennessee destroyed the Ravens in the playoffs last year. And the other thing to consider is I still haven't seen enough from Lamar Jackson from the pocket to trust him come playoff time. A quarterback that can just run around and be mobile is not going to win you playoff games. I understand that he won the MVP last year and he had the same kind of performance this season, but I don't see a mobile quarterback, that being his only skill, being able to get a team of victory and advance in the playoffs. I don't see that happening. And by the way, Tennessee has Derrick Henry, who is an uttermost beast. And you have Ryan Tannehill, who's been a big improvement ever since he got to Tennessee, since he got from Miami and away from Adam Gase. And also, by the way, you have some big weapons, A.J. Brown, one of them, to throw to. So I just don't see how Baltimore is going to pull it out here.
Well, Reed, you make valid points, but as I've stated before, I am a defensive guy, and consider this. The Titans' defense is, in my eyes, a bottom 5 unit. They do not scare me. They can't get to the quarterback. They'll get a few lucky interceptions here and there, but at the end of the day, you talk about how good the Titans' offense is and how they can run over the Ravens' defense. But Lamar is still dynamic. Marquise Brown is coming back. J.K. Dobbins is emerging. The Baltimore O-line is pretty, it's getting there, pretty solid. So I believe that this is an offensive shootout. But when it comes to the defense that I trust more, I'm leaning toward Baltimore, even though I am a huge Derrick Henry fan. And truthfully, I think the game could go either way, and I would say that I personally trust the Ravens by less than a score, probably by like 3.
I'm going to go with CJ here. I think it's going to be a dogfight game. I think Baltimore has learned from some of the things that happened last year. I think the biggest thing it's going to come down to is whether or not Ryan Tannehill and his wide receivers can manage to maneuver around this very scary Baltimore secondary between Marcus Peters and Marlon Humphrey. It's a very, very talented and very strategic secondary who can basically manipulate any wide receiver they want. Yes, they do have Corey Davis. Yes, they do have A.J. Brown. They have the dynamic Jonnu Smith who can do anything on the field. But for me, I think what it's going to come down to is whether or not they can incorporate the run game and have a solid passing game. Because let's face it, this Baltimore secondary is going to give A.J. Brown and Corey Davis a hard time.
Yeah, I'm actually, this is the game that has been circled on my docket the most. I'm with the Patriots being out, I'm definitely rooting for the Titans. They're probably my team in the playoffs, and like even before they were announced to be like the matchup that they were going to face, I kind of figured it was going to be just a way that the Titans were pretty much locked in to win their division unless they somehow lost to Houston. But aside from that, I kind of figured this was going to be the matchup with the Ravens securing the 5 seed. And I've been going Ravens for like a week and a half thinking about this matchup. But then for some reason yesterday, it kind of clicked to me like, why would I go against Tennessee when they've already proven this twice already, that they can beat up Lamar Jackson, that they can make him throw for over 30 times, and that's when he struggles the most. He threw for 29 times back in Week 11 against back against the Titans in November, and he threw over 30 times in the playoffs last year. He threw for over 360 yards, and they still didn't even come close to the Titans. Ryan Tannehill threw for 88 yards in that playoff game, if we remember correctly. Derrick Henry absolutely dominated them. They dominated time of possession, and they dominated just in the run game. That's where Baltimore needs to win. They need to dominate time of possession for them to have a shot here. Is if Tennessee gets the ball, I have very much confidence that Derrick Henry, who's put up over 150 yards both times that he's faced them in the past 2 years, I don't see any reason that changes unless somehow the Ravens get some Monstar juice into him, just get roided up and they dominate the run game. But I really don't see how that's going to happen. Ryan Tannehill has proven that he can pass against this team, and then he's proven that he can win in shootouts. He has the most game-winning drives in the NFL this season with 6. He can play from behind. We still have questions if Lamar can do that. I know he had the game against Cleveland where he did come back, but I don't know. I think there's too many questions, and I'm going to go with history here. I'm going to take the home dog. I'm going to take Tennessee here.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ben. I don't. And by the way, Baltimore's going to be on the road this time, so I don't. And Tennessee's going to allow some fans. Granted, it's not the full capacity, but I just don't. I agree. The Lamar Jackson mystery of the playoffs and from the pocket just scares me too much to go with the Ravens, and based off history. All right, let's continue down. So, Bears at the Saints on Sunday, 4:40 CBS. So, I have to go with the Saints here. The Bears just lucked in, honestly, to this playoff because of, the Rams win. So for me, the Bears have been way too inconsistent at the quarterback position with Nick Foles and going back to Mitchell Trubisky and just going back and forth between there. And oh, by the way, you're going up against a future Hall of Famer in Drew Brees. And oh, by the way, you're going to be on the road in New Orleans in a dome with some fans in attendance. So I don't see how Chicago has a shot here. Drew Brees is going to dominate Chicago this Sunday.
Yeah, I think game score might be close, but I don't think any way this narrative is going to be even close. I don't know if a single person is going to be taking the Bears, and understandably so. Like Chicago, great story and everything. They're 8-8. They had a 6-game losing streak in the middle of the season. Somehow they're in the playoffs at 8-8, pretty much because Kyler Murray got hurt at the wrong time and Cliff Kingsbury can't coach. But that's aside from the point. The Saints defense is pretty good, and they might be one of the best in the playoffs, if not the best in the playoffs, assuming that the Rams are going to be booted, but aside from the point. And Drew Brees has looked pretty solid over the past couple weeks. He hasn't been playing like too many hard opponents. He did pretty well against the Kansas City Chiefs, even though he struggled at the beginning of the game, but he's looked good. I know he probably isn't 100% because 12 cracked ribs is something that's going to take a little bit to heal from, but even without Michael Thomas and the uncertainty around whether Alvin Kamara, Latavius Murray, and that running back core is going to be back from the COVID IR. But anyway, I still don't see a reason why the Saints would lose this game. They have the experience, they have the talent, they have the coach. I'm going to take the Saints here pretty easily.
I think Kamara is supposed to be back because it has the extra day with the 10-day on Sunday. But yeah, go ahead, Brett.
Oh, sorry about that. I'm also going to take the Saints in this game. I believe that this playoff berth pretty much saved Matt Nagy's job. Seeing that his quarterback hasn't really turned out this far between going to him and then back to Foles and then back to Trubisky. To me, the quarterback play hasn't been consistent. Even if Nagy somehow finds some sort of scheme that works in some way for Trubisky against New Orleans, I don't see him making any sort of progress going up against this very successful postseason secondary between Jenkins, Lattimore, both Jenkins, Janoris, and Malcolm. I just don't see it happening here. I'm taking New Orleans all the way.
Yeah, definitely. There's really, outside of like Khalil Mack and Akeem Hicks, there's honestly no part of this Bears defense that scares me. Or Bears team overall that scares me. They really don't have any offense outside of Allen Robinson and the occasional flash of David Montgomery. And like we said, it's in New Orleans. It's just, I honestly cannot see Chicago winning. I'll be shocked if they win. And I believe if Chicago loses, you need to fire your GM, Ryan Pace, just solely for the mistake of Trubisky.
Well, okay. I mean, I think we all agree there. I think Trubisky. There's been a lot of questions there, and I don't know if I would go as far to say fire your GM when you make the playoffs this year, but I think there's still going to be some time to figure that out once the offseason comes for Chicago. But we all agree there. So
If I'm not mistaken, too, if I might just jump in real quick,
Go
I
ahead.
think this game's on Nickelodeon. I'm almost positive this game is on Nickelodeon.
It is on Nickelodeon, Brett. You are correct.
Very interesting.
I thought it was one of the AFC games.
Nope, it is it's the 4:30, 4:40 game, the Sunday game. So it turned out to be New Orleans, Chicago. So that game is going to be on Nickelodeon.
First of all, thank God it's that game, because I don't know how many people are going to be watching that game. No offense, Bears fans. At least this is the experimental one. I have no clue what's going to go on in that game for Nickelodeon, dude.
Yeah, that's going to be a blowout right from the kickoff. All right, let's continue down. So the last game, Browns are at the Steelers Sunday night. And right before an hour before we went on, we had some big news coming out of Cleveland. So the Browns have had a mini outbreak so far. So the Browns head coach, Kevin Stefanski, and 2 other coaches and 2 players have tested positive for COVID-19. And according to Mary Kay Kabat of Cleveland.com, one of the 2 players are significant. So Cleveland, the first time in 18 years they go to the playoffs, and they're going to be out without their head coach, and it looks like 2 players. So honestly, before this news even came down, I didn't think Cleveland really had a shot anyway, because they're too young and inexperienced, and I just don't see how you're going into Pittsburgh. Granted, yes, they beat them in Week 17, but the Steelers were without Ben Roethlisberger and a bunch of their starters. So, and yet it was still close. So I still think that the Steelers are going to run away here at home. Ben Roethlisberger will be back. I understand that Pittsburgh has some concerns with the running game, and ever since they lost to Washington, but I don't think Cleveland had a chance either way.
Yeah, talking about, first of all, first thing you should look at is just this past week they played in Cleveland won, but Mason Rudolph was under center, not Big Ben, and TJ Watt, who is the team's clear MVP, did not play a single snap. And the Pittsburgh defense is pretty deteriorated by injury, so without TJ Watt there, it isn't as dangerous as it usually is. And Cleveland didn't really put the game away until late in the 4th quarter. So even before this injury or this COVID news came out about Stefanski and whoever this player is that's significant, it's going to be somewhat of a blow regardless. Look at the Jets game that they played a couple weeks back, which shouldn't even have been played in the first place. They didn't have an entire wide receiver corps, but that's aside from the point. I'm taking Pittsburgh here. I'm going to take the experience of Mike Tomlin, Big Ben. I think that their wide receiver corps has been improving. Deontay Johnson finally got rid of his case of the drops, hopefully. Juju has stopped dancing on the logos. Maybe he could start doing that if they win a playoff game. I wouldn't mind it too much if it's in Baltimore or something, dances on the logo, but that's aside the point. I'm going to take Pittsburgh here. And that loss of Stefanski, even if it is like a Myles Garrett type or a Baker Mayfield type, that is the significant player, Jarvis Landry, someone like that. I think Stefanski is the big blow here. He has clearly been the difference maker in Cleveland this year.
I've said that the special teams coordinator, Mike Crayford, is going to be the acting head coach, but yeah.
Yeah, I think Stefanski's been the difference maker here. I think if he has some influence on this game, it would be great, but I can't see Cleveland winning. And it really stinks because it's just unfortunate with the news coming out recently. And they've just played – the last few weeks have been just really weird for them. And it should have been something that the NFL handled a little bit better, but it's what's going on in a COVID-19 world right now. So kind of have to roll with the punches. And unfortunately, Cleveland, you're probably going to be out of the playoffs sooner rather than later.
I'm also taking the Steelers train here. I think Kevin Stefanski, like you said, Ben, has been the biggest difference maker between Freddie Kitchens, who didn't really know how to handle Baker Mayfield last season and how to control his wide receivers, to you move into Kevin Stefanski, who finds the right scheme between Chubb and Hunt and finding a way to find some chemistry between your wide receivers, even without Odell. I think he's the biggest difference maker in Cleveland. So without him, I don't see them having much of a chance, even if they had one to begin with. They got destroyed in Pittsburgh earlier in the season, even with Stefanski and everyone. So I'm going to take the Steelers here. I think they're the most experienced. I think they're the most talented on defense, even without guys like Bud Dupree and Devin Bush. I'm still going to take the Steelers, and I think they're going to win by a very large margin.
Yeah, I have to agree with everyone so far. I mean, you look at how they barely beat the Steelers without Roethlisberger, and now Roethlisberger's coming back, and the Browns are down a head coach. That's not a recipe for success. I really can't say anything different. You guys just put it very well, and I just gotta go with Pittsburgh.
Yeah. And this, from what I've seen, Cleveland has not won a playoff game since 1995, and it looks like that trend will be continuing. All right, so that's for the wild card weekend. So now just talking about the AFC and NFC. So can anyone beat Kansas City? I know we touched a little bit upon it earlier, but to me, I still don't believe, as long as you have Patrick Mahomes, I think he can go off at any moment. And I know the only team that I think has a chance would be Buffalo, but I just don't. First of all, it would have to be in Kansas City because they have home field throughout. And I just don't see, I understand Josh Allen's been amazing and this whole team has been amazing, but this is kind of, I mean, granted they went to the playoffs before this, but the way that they've been playing this year has been uncharted territory for them. So for me, anything with them right now is house money. I don't see them going that far and beating Kansas City. I mean, Kansas City, between Tyreek Hill, Patrick Mahomes, I just don't see, and the abundance of weapons in addition to that, I just don't see them losing to Buffalo with Patrick, as long as Patrick Mahomes is still there.
See, I think that Buffalo has a legitimate shot to beat Kansas City. I think we've seen this past season that the Chiefs have some vulnerable spots. I mean, they lost to the Raiders earlier this season, and they almost lost some close games to Carolina and Atlanta towards the later half of the year. So regardless, I do think the Chiefs, in the most parts, are house money. I definitely think that there are a lot of spots on offense and some spots on defense that you can almost guarantee and you can lock in. But I think the fact that Buffalo is coming into this game red hot, if they even face Kansas City, they would be coming in pretty hot. They have Diggs, they have Gabriel Davis, they have, who should have been a Pro Bowler in my opinion, Cole Beasley. I mean, you have so many guys on offense that help contribute to a good win and a great scheme. So I think that if anyone has a shot to beat Kansas City, it's Buffalo, and I think they can legitimately do it.
Yeah, you're right. But for me, the issue isn't with the other teams. It's with Kansas City. They're not having as many convincing victories, you know? They're not really blowing teams out as much. I am seeing, like, a lot of come from behind, fourth quarter nail biters. And all I'm saying is one day they're going to be in a situation where maybe there's not enough time on the clock. Maybe Mahomes doesn't nail that throw. Look, my point is Lady Luck has smiled upon the Kansas City Chiefs, and history has always shown you cannot rely on luck that often. And this is the regular season. This is the playoffs. Every team, AFC or NFC, well, probably except Chicago, deserve to be there. And it's basically any given team on any given Sunday. The Chiefs are still my favorite to win the NFC, but I wouldn't be shocked if they didn't.
Yeah, I think anyone calling a team that isn't the Kansas City Chiefs a favorite for either the AFC title game or the Super Bowl is kind of going out of their way to kind of disrespect them. However, I don't think it's a blasphemous statement saying that you think the Bills are the better team or the Packers are the better team. You kind of just have to go off of what they've shown you, not just this year, but over the past few years, and how well that they've played in the playoffs. Like, they've lost to Tom Brady, and that's pretty much it since Patrick Mahomes has joined there. And it was a game that Mahomes probably should have won, but that's aside from the
Had it gone
point.
both sides, they probably would have won.
Yeah. Like, he honestly could be undefeated in the playoffs right now. And it's something dangerous where you can have some thoughts that might go against the Kansas City Chiefs, and all the points brought up by Brett and CJ are valid to why Kansas City has kind of lost their way a little bit over the past few games, but it is playoff time now. I would still keep the Chiefs as my favorite, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if a team, say the Bills or the Titans or the Ravens, honestly, I could see any team in the AFC having a 50-50 matchup with them, aside from the Steelers. I think they're the one team where I don't think they would be able to keep up with Kansas City, but I think every other team matches up with them somewhat well. I don't think Kansas City would have a significant advantage, but just to answer the question at hand, I still think Kansas City is the favorite in the AFC.
I'm pretty sure Tennessee got destroyed by Kansas City in the championship last year, but
Yeah.
But I agree. I think Kansas City is still going to be my favorite in the AFC. The only team I think that would have a chance, like we were saying, was Buffalo. But when you look at Buffalo, though, you're talking about their kind of weapons. Kansas City can easily match their weapons too. So, and then some. So I think that Kansas City is still my favorite. But yes, if we had to pick one challenger, it would have to be Buffalo. But I would still give Kansas City a slight edge just off their history. And oh, by the way, they still have Patrick Mahomes. So that's the AFC. In the NFC, so who is the best team in the NFC? For me, I would have to go with Green Bay, and knowing that because they have the home field advantage throughout, and once it gets into late December into January, teams are not going to want to go into Green Bay in that cold weather environment. I understand there's no fans in attendance in Wisconsin, but that's not the point of the history of Lambeau Field. The history is that the weather there can disrupt a visiting team's play, especially if they're coming from warm city like New Orleans, for example. And they have Aaron Rodgers, who is right up there in MVP conversation with Patrick Mahomes, and I would not want to face come playoff time.
Yeah, I agree with Reed. I'm still taking the Packers. They're kind of a cop-out taking the number one seed, but they're the number one seed for a reason. I would keep the Saints more in this conversation if not for the injury concerns with Drew Brees. I know he's played somewhat well over the past few weeks, but there's still not 100% certainty that he is fully recovered, and he is an aging quarterback. He is not shown as much aging like a fine wine like Tom Brady has. Drew Brees hasn't aged just as well. I guess my biggest challenger for Green Bay would be the Seahawks. And I think that's pretty clear. If I see any signs from Russell Wilson in the offense that they are somewhat back to what they were in the first half, I think their defense can hang with Green Bay's offense. And we've seen it numerous times over the past few years that Seattle is able to go into Green Bay and beat them in the playoffs. So I like history there, but even though I do like Seattle's chances, I'm going to still stick with Green Bay just for the time being. Their defense has shown massive improvement throughout the season. The loss of David Bakhtiari is going to be huge, and we saw last week that Aaron Rodgers wasn't being protected as well against the Bears. They were getting more sacks and getting more hits on the quarterback, but they still have a great quarterback there, possibly my MVP at least, Aaron Rodgers. Their running game has been pretty good with three-headed monster of Jamal Williams, A.J. Dillon, and Aaron Jones, of course, who's going to be a free agent, and Devontae Adams, who might be the offensive player of the year. So, yeah, I'm going to stick with Green Bay here.
I just want to say one thing before you guys jump in. In terms of New Orleans, the concern with me with New Orleans is that outside of their home stadium, which is a dome, and if they go into a cold weather city, I'm not really 100% sold on them performing in cold weather cities. That's a concern to me, knowing that they're always playing indoors. just, I mean, granted, for example, I believe Drew Brees was still out for this game. They went up to Philadelphia, and granted, Drew Brees wasn't playing, but I'm just going based off my history of them playing in the indoors.
Mhm. So based on what you guys said previously, I'm also taking Green Bay. I think one of the most massive improvements that I've seen from last year to this year, like you mentioned, Ben, is the run game. Um, Aaron Jones, we all kind of knew what Aaron Jones was going to do. He came in and pretty much was the bell cow of this committee. He was very consistent. I thought he was a very impressive running back this season. A.J. Dillon was a very pleasant surprise. He's came in and contributed pretty well to this Packers run game, and he's been a strong leader in this backfield. And Jamal Williams, a nice compliment as well. But this Packers team with Aaron Rodgers, who has one of the best cadences in the game and can manage to make a free play anytime he wants, it's next to none. I'm going to take Packers, best team in the NFC here. New Orleans just has too many concerns for me as far as potential injury risks if they even get down that line, or playing in different weather environments like you mentioned, Reed. I think that's just too many concerns, and I think Green Bay is the most reliable and safe pick for number one.
Yeah, you guys said it well. I couldn't put it any better. I mean, Green Bay is obviously the number one team without Bakhtiari. Saints, way too many issues. Michael Thomas, I don't even believe is at 100%. I mean, outside of their defense, my big question is with Drew Brees, and I don't see him doing much. Seattle, I'm just not sold. If they can get back to where they were earlier in the season, then maybe, but I still need to see more from their defense and maybe a little bit more from Chris Carson. And honestly, I don't really believe that the rest of the teams have a chance. Maybe Tampa, if Tom Brady can repeat his performance against Aaron Rodgers, but in Lambeau, that's going to be different.
Brady
And
would be, yeah.
I sincerely don't see the football team or Chicago or the Rams doing anything.
Brady would be the only other one than Seattle that, if he was to get that far, would maybe have a chance to keep up with Rodgers at Lambeau. Granted, Tampa Bay is a warm weather city and all that, but the only way I could see that happening is because Tom Brady, having played, I mean, he played in New England, for crying out loud, which is just as similar weather. So that's if even they get that far, but I agree with you. All right, so that's with the NFC. Playoff picture. Now, let's just talk about a couple of teams' futures heading into the offseason that didn't make it. First off, with the Patriots, one of the questions is that what's going to happen with Cam Newton. I mean, it sounds like from what Bill Belichick and Cam have said in their press conferences, it doesn't sound like they're going to be back together, because it sounds like neither of them committed to answering that question of being back next season. And I agree. I understand why Cam Newton has definitely struggled this season, specifically from the pocket, and I understand that, and I think I don't think he'll be back because of that. The only thing I'm going to say about Cam is, I think part of it, that what played into it, is he got there late because he signed late, and you're during a pandemic, so you're training with practicing with your team was pretty limited. And then he had COVID, which once he came back from COVID, it looked like he wasn't the same, because if you remember that game in Seattle, he was right on his game, and they were a play away from being the Seahawks. But I do agree that I do not think he'll be back, but that's just some things to consider about Cam.
When I take a look at this Patriots team, there are a lot of issues, obviously. The biggest of which for me is the lack of talent on offense. Between Cam Newton and a very slim picking wide receiver core, you definitely need to reevaluate this entire offense, and in my opinion, rebuild it from the ground up. Your offensive line is probably your most, I guess, safest parts of your offense. I mean, you have a couple strong guys, Marcus Cannon, some other guys as well. But just taking a look at the cap room that the Patriots potentially have next season to spend, They have $55 million in cap room to spend. If it's just me, you go out and spend it on a potentially semi-consistent quarterback and a star wide receiver that you know your quarterback can rely on. Biggest one that jumps out to me is Allen Robinson. He's going to be a free agent next year. I think he can provide some very big, significant help to the Patriots. If you're looking at quarterbacks, maybe you look at someone who's had some playoff experience, Andy Dalton.
That would be another bridge, though.
It would be another bridge. You're correct. That's another point that I was just about to make, too. If you have the draft pick at 15, you go out and draft a quarterback. Who's going to be there? I don't know. Maybe someone like Trey Lance, maybe someone like Mac Jones, maybe even Justin Fields if he even slides that far. I have no clue. But I think the biggest concern for the Patriots right now is finding some sort of answer at quarterback and finding a wide receiver on that offense that can compete with that quarterback.
Yeah, the Patriots certainly do have a lot of holes, and Ben and I are huge fans, so we know. And like I said, quarterback first and foremost. However, the linebacker and defensive line position need to be addressed because of there's the sheer amount of people that they lost. And with all that cap space, you definitely would be able to, I guess, you could definitely do some bargain hunting. I mean, there's a lot of guys like Everson Griffin, Damon Harrison that, could fill nice roles. Yes, they're bridges, but they're decent short-term answers. And for linebackers, there's also guys like Devondre Campbell, decent sideline-to-sideline guy that New England really hasn't had in a bit. But then offense, now that's interesting. Now for quarterback, I truly believe that Jimmy Garoppolo is going to get cut because he's in one of those weird situations where he's due a lot of money, but the team would only eat $2.8 million in dead cap if they release him, which is pretty interesting for a guy who's getting paid as much as he is. And yes, I know Kyle Shanahan says he wants him to return, but at the end of the day, Kyle Shanahan's not making the decisions, is he? And John Lynch has not committed to him. And if all the sports pundits are to be believed, that he will more than likely get cut. And I don't think he's really going to be paid that big contract. So I'd say if he hits the market, bring him back. And I would say definitely, if not, draft a quarterback either in the first or second round. I truly believe that Mac Jones or even Kyle Trask could fall to the second round. And there's also guys like Ian Book who will also be there in the second round. And when it comes to receiver, like you said, there's also guys like Allen Robinson that could bolster, that could bolster their corps. There's also guys like T.Y. Hilton, A.J. Green, who you could get for cheaper deals. And, of course, there's a tight end. And you saw Devin Asiasi started to trend up at the end of the season. But Bill Belichick has been linked, even going back to last season, to Hunter Henry before he was franchise tagged. And I would almost count on them signing Hunter Henry first and foremost. Now, the O-line is good. They definitely have to re-sign Tooney and Andrews. And with their money, there's no reason they can't sign Andrews, sign Tooney. And you already have guys like Awenu and Wynn and Mason who are already playing key parts. And a quarterback will only be as good as his O-line and the weapons he has to throw to. So I'd say you fortify the O-line, get some weapons, and then maybe look at signing or drafting a quarterback.
Yeah, I think there's very clearly two approaches that they could go here. It's either they you mentioned that the cap space a bunch of times, and you guys brought up some really good candidates that they could go after: Hunter Henry, Jimmy Garoppolo. You mentioned Allen Robinson, Brett did. Those are three players that I would love to have on the Patriots. Allen Robinson, especially one of my favorite wide receivers in the game. I think he's a super underrated guy, especially with the quarterback play that he's had. Both in Chicago and Jacksonville. But aside the point, they could either try and go for a competitive team once again and try and make those signings, re-sign guys like Andrews and Tooney, like CJ mentioned, or they could just let some of those guys go and take a different approach while kind of just trying to rebuild, try and look towards the 2022 draft class. That quarterback class is pretty solid. I don't think it's as the ceiling like Fields and Lawrence does, but pretty solid guys. So if they do want to look for a quarterback to the future, they could potentially, and I never like saying this, but they could potentially kind of throw the season a little bit, try and rebuild for the future. And I don't know, it's
doing that again though.
yeah. Well, that was the next point I was going to, and it's not a guarantee, at least in my opinion, that if this second thought is entertained by the front office in the minimum, I don't think Bill Belichick would stay. So I think that's why I would lean towards the first option. I think that's the option the Patriots are going to choose. Whether I think that's the better option, I honestly don't think it is. But I will say that the pieces that the Patriots do have right now, at least on their O-line and defensive side, we have to remember this as well. They're going to be getting guys back from the COVID list, that people that opted out, guys like Patrick Chung and Dante Hightower. Those are two really big pieces. They are aging pieces, but they are still significant pieces, leadership people in the locker room. So it's definitely an interesting case. You could go either way, but yeah, it's going to be an interesting offseason in Foxborough for sure.
Here's the next question, though. So you're going a different direction at quarterback. What do you do with Stidham then? Because he's definitely not ready. Do you keep him as the backup? Do you just get rid of him outright?
I think that's an option where if they go after a guy like a Jimmy Garoppolo or someone that I really like, Matthew Stafford, who might be on the trade market as well, depending on what Detroit does. Matt Ryan's another option, yeah. It would probably try and keep Stidham as the backup, maybe in training camp if they see any flashes and they don't get one of those guys that I mentioned. Maybe they ride him out as a starter. I haven't seen anything to really validate the potential starting nature that they've said from Jarrett Stidham. So I guess I would ride him out on the bench to answer your question, Reed, but it's just a weird situation with Stidham where people have been hyping him up for a couple years now, and we really haven't seen anything to really validate those thoughts.
From what I've seen so far, when they've put him in after Cam plays, I don't see really that big of a difference between the two of them.
Kind of mediocrity. There's so little that you can get in garbage time like that, really insight on players, but
yeah,
I don't know.
So then the next question after that, though, is lastly for the Patriots. I guess it's mainly just for Cam Newton, for him personally. So assuming, as we think, that the Patriots don't bring him back, could we see another team take another flyer on him or make him another as a starter? I think COVID had a part of his downturn of his play this year. But I mean, we already saw it in the open market from the last offseason. No one wanted him, so I mean, I think if Philly's able to trade the Wentz contract, they'd be a pretty interesting fit with Jalen Hurts under center. I don't think they've solidified him as a starting option if they're going to keep Wentz or not. But if they do trade Wentz, I think they would want a solid backup, and Cam Newton would be able to go and kind of mentor a similar player that he is, Jalen Hurts, who has shown a lot of prowess in the first 4 games that we've seen from him. We've seen some mistakes, but to be honest, those first 2 games against the Saints and against the Cardinals, we saw a lot of potential from Jalen. So if they're able to get some weapons around him, Cam would be a good fit in Philly, I think.
I personally, I agree with Ben here. There are very few teams that can fit a scheme like Cam Newton. A lot of QB run options. It's a very different type of football from what you see from a traditional type of quarterback like Matt Stafford, like Matt Ryan, like Tom Brady. So for me, if you're going to pick a team that could potentially fit a scheme if he decides to come back, it could be Philly. It could be Baltimore. You need a offensive line that is trained and knows how to handle a quarterback like Cam Newton. You need an offensive coordinator who understands what Cam Newton's strengths and weaknesses are. So for me, you need a team that understands, what they're dealing with, guys that already have mobile quarterbacks like Baltimore, like Philly. I'd even consider teams that have different types of, running backs, like even Indianapolis when they have Jacoby Brissett sometimes. They understand what's going on. They've dealt with Andrew Luck as well. So that's just another bolder take. But if you want to sign Cam Newton, go ahead.
Baltimore's not going away from Lamar Jackson, though. And I don't think Philly would just go away with Hurts either, Bill. Unless you're going to do like a 2-quarterback system, I don't.
Oh, I want to preface. I would think Newton would be the backup in Philly.
Oh yeah.
I just wasn't sure if they're entirely sold on Hurts, and if they're able to somehow get rid of that Wentz contract, they would want someone solid behind him. And I think Newton's solid enough and would be a good mentor there.
I agree with Ben here.
Yeah, Ben's correct.
So then, all right. So that's the Patriots and Cam. So with the Giants now for the next team, let's just start from the general manager standpoint. So there was question if they should bring back Dave Gettleman, although it sounds like they already have made the decision to bring him back. So here's the way I see this whole Giants with Dave Gettleman thing. He's made definitely some poor signings / draft picks, but I think he's also made some good selections. Like first of all, you had Bradbury and Darius Slayton, which I think he got some good selections with, and he got Leonard Williams in that trade with the Jets, which everyone mocked him for, which turned out to be pretty good the way he played. So I think it's kind of 50-50. Yes, he's had some bad signings or drafts, but he also had some steals. And the other thing, my concern though, is if you were to get rid of him, Joe Judge was Gettleman's choice of head coach, and Joe Judge has rebuilt this culture this season with the Giants. So if you get rid of him and are you going to bring in someone else from outside your organization, and then what? So then it's not, Joe Judge isn't that guy's selection, and then Joe Judge kind of gets put on the hot seat, I would think, right away.
If it's just my opinion here, I don't think they should fire Gettleman at all. Yes, I agree with you. He has made some poor decisions. DeAndre Baker, obviously, probably the most primary in my opinion. Will Hernandez hasn't really turned out to be the best either. What's that?
Nate Soldier, the contract there.
Soldier hasn't really
Andrew
been the
Thomas.
best either. Mm-hmm. No,
Even Saquon Barkley to an extent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But there have also been some pretty valuable acquisitions, in my opinion. Xavier McKinney, I think he's going to be a stud for a pretty decent amount of time in New York. I liked what I saw from him at the end of this season. Andrew Thomas, you can argue back and forth. He had his struggling points. He had his decent points, but he definitely needs work. Daniel Jones, same thing. Dexter Lawrence, not bad. Darius Slayton, a great acquisition. And I think probably the most beneficial that he's made in his time is Leonard Williams. No matter what they say, I think they should pay Leonard Williams a good amount of cash this offseason. For 11.5 sacks, that's primetime money right there.
And the other thing, I know this trade was kind of mocked at the time and all. You could argue the return that he got, but I do believe that shipping out Odell Beckham Jr. has been a big plus to this Giants direction of where they're going, which he was also criticized a lot for at that time too. But the other point for the Giants is, so now looking at Daniel Jones specifically, this ended his second year at the Giants. I still honestly don't really know exactly. He hasn't been consistent. The only plus that I've seen from him is he's a mobile quarterback, so he's a threat to run, which the Giants haven't had, but he's also inconsistent with his throwing abilities from the pocket. And that's a concern for me. Honestly, this third year is going to be a big year for him. He's been very inconsistent from the pocket, and that's my big concern. And also the turnovers we can't ignore.
Mm-hmm.
True. And if Daniel Jones doesn't take the next step next season, I would really consider looking at replacing Gettleman. And I'll tell you what, honestly, if I'm the organization, I'm like, look, you've made some really stupid decisions, but you've also had a few good points. So I'd say give him one more year. This year, I believe, is the big make or break year. If the Giants, I'd say, don't at least finish second in the division, maybe sneak into the playoffs, maybe they don't.
They probably have to make the playoffs at this point, I would think.
Yeah, I would imagine. If Daniel Jones is really your guy, then Gettleman has nothing to fear. But if Jones doesn't take that next step, I would especially really consider, especially next season, consider moving on from Gettleman. Like I said, if I'm the organization, I'm giving him one more year.
Yeah, this situation reeks of Mitchell Trubisky, Ryan Pace kind of vibes because let's think about this. It's a quarterback that has had interception problems and trouble just turning over the football. We really don't know what he is, and a GM that is constantly questioned at every move that he makes with a team that has a pretty solid defense and kind of mediocre offense. Sounds exactly like what the Bears have been for the past few years. I think Daniel Jones sticks around. Up until this Cowboys game, he had gone 6 straight games without throwing an interception. He was still having fumble issues, which that's going to happen for a mobile quarterback.
By the way, wasn't his fault. That was tipped and should have been caught, honestly. But go ahead.
Yeah, but he still had issues turning over the football just in general. Like his interception to touchdown ratio was really bad this year. Like really, really bad. He had a stretch where he didn't throw a touchdown in like 3-4 straight games. That was in that stretch where he didn't throw a pick. But if you're not throwing touchdowns, not throwing interceptions, what are you really doing? But I think he sticks around. I think Gettleman sticks around as well. I think this is, like CJ mentioned, a make or break year. Very similar to what kind of this year was. But this year is 2020, really weird year. And it's a weird situation. And I don't. The Giants did pretty well for what I expected them to do. I thought they were going to be probably one of the worst teams in the league, and 6-10 fighting for a division title, even though it was at 7-9 that they could have won it. Understandable. It's a weird situation, and they do have a shot for next year if Daniel Jones shows improvement, and they probably need another weapon for Daniel Jones. You mentioned earlier, Brett, Allen Robinson is a free agent. Chris Godwin is also a free agent. I don't know if the Giants would have any interest in either of those two, but it wouldn't be the worst idea with Sterling Shepard being an aging player, Golden Tate being an aging player. Evan Ingram, I know he made the Pro Bowl, but man has drops for days. And Darius Slayton was kind of inconsistent all year. But, yeah, if they were to add someone there, that would show an improvement, at least for me.
If this is just like kind of simple, just to put it in like a little bit of simpler perspective here, Daniel Jones has had, yes, we've all said he's had his ups and downs. To me, when it comes down to is the offensive line. The Giants have known the past few seasons to have a poor side offensive line. They're young, they're developing. They've had veterans who, like you mentioned, like Nate Solder, who have come in and just not been the guys that they wanted them to turn out to be. So for me, I personally, even though he hasn't looked the best, I blame partially of Daniel Jones's failures to be on his offensive line because he hasn't had the best protection all season. We'll be honest there. His situation is very similar to me, who watches them all the time, is Drew Lock. Very young, developing offensive line, very inconsistent with failures and turnovers on the ball. So for me, Daniel Jones definitely needs some sort of veteran presence on the line who you can rely on, or a high pick in the draft who could potentially be consistent. So for me, I think with Daniel Jones, it starts with adding some potential weapons and wide receivers and then bolstering your offensive line big time.
The offensive line is definitely big. The problem, yes, the offensive line's been the problem, but the other thing that he's struggling with is he can't notice when there's any pressure coming his way, and he'll either take a 10-yard sack or get stripped of the football, and he'll have no idea. He doesn't notice it. He doesn't know when it's time to throw the football away, which just comes with being a young quarterback. But that's something else he'll have to work on coming into this third year. The other thing on the Giants point, though, I agree that, or I would say that the Giants, it was definitely worth it not having that top pick and rather going into playoff contention all the way to Week 17, because Joe Judge has completely built this Giants team into more acceptable, I guess you could see, as seen around the league, because otherwise you're not going to build your culture. And I think, yes, you lose your draft pick, which would have been higher up, but I think the way they did it this year was fine. And I would do that year in and year out. And lose a higher draft pick because of that. But moving across town to New York, though, for the last team that we're going to talk about today, the New York Jets, which are way behind the Giants in this. So the Jets, Adam Gase, as expected, was let go as head coach. So far, it sounds like there's a bunch of coordinators that are going to be interviewed, which personally, if I'm the Jets, I would not want to go another coordinator route. Coordinator route. I would want, if I'm the Jets, I want a name and somebody that has either experience / being able to hold people and players and teams accountable, which the Jets have lacked a leader, specifically with Adam Gase and going back with Todd Bowles. That's what I see with Adam Gase. And I'll just quickly say on Sam Darnold, I'm not going to trade Sam Darnold and take Justin Fields at number 2. In my opinion, if you had Trevor Lawrence, honestly, I would not have probably done it with Trevor Lawrence either. Sam Darnold's really young, and he's honestly, the coaching has been really bad to say politely. He needs a coach that can get in there and actually develop and not just be someone that can get a good word from Peyton Manning. So that's what he needs. And by the way, the Jets had no weapons this year. But
if we're looking at, just basic points, I think you made a great point, Reed. I think the coaching has been very, very poor, just to say the least, for Adam Gase. I don't trade Sam Darnold at all. I actually think he's shown good signs of talent, and I definitely think he's shown good signs of leadership. And I think if it's for me, I would even consider the possibility of trading down and just stocking up on picks and just grabbing talent where you can, saving cap room, looking for guys who can, surround Sam Darnold and make him a better quarterback. They've already done so. I think it was a great pick by New York in getting Mekhi Becton. I think he's going to be a great offensive lineman once developed properly. But for me, I think as far as head coaching points, the Jets need someone who can develop a culture. I'm not sure, like you said, if a coordinator could go in and develop a culture immediately. A big name would definitely help. There are some various names out there. I don't know if they'll be great or not.
Eric Bieniemy, I think, was like the top name that's out there right now.
Eric Bieniemy.
Yeah, he's a name and a coordinator, so
I also
that
like
could work.
Even though he's a coordinator right now, I definitely think he'd develop a great culture, and that's Arthur Smith from the Titans, offensive coordinator. Even though he is a coordinator, I definitely like the culture that Vrabel has built in Tennessee, and I think Arthur Smith has that same sort of mindset when he comes to developing his offense. So I definitely think a potential name to watch out for in New York would be Arthur Smith from the Titans.
And this is, I kind of just thought of this off the top of my head, but I'd love to get some thoughts on this. So Urban Meyer has been rumored to potentially go to the Jags. That has been pretty much the only team that he's been connected to, and he wants like a $12 million contract, which is kind of expensive for a head coach. Yeah. CJ, you look surprised. Yeah,
especially a college coach who is
Yep.
unproven at the NFL level.
Yep, but this is like kind of the plan I was going to put in place. And let me hear thoughts on this. So the Jets are a team that could pay Urban Meyer that type of contract. They get Urban Meyer, and they either flip Sam Darnold for picks, or they flip the number 2 pick for picks, and kind of just let Urban Meyer kind of develop a culture in there. Because I think either way, if he has Fields or Darnold, I think he would be a pretty good guy to kind of set a new regime in New York, which is something really important. They need a figure there. And I don't know what else they would do if it was like Bieniemy or one of those guys. I don't know how much of an impact they would really leave.
Okay, 2 things.
I think Bieniemy would probably rebuild pretty well. Oh, sorry, Reed, I didn't want to jump in on you there.
So you're saying trade Darnold and then take Fields with Urban Meyer at the helm?
You could go either route. So you could trade the pick that is likely going to be Fields, or if they hang on to it, it's probably going to be there's a high up offensive linebacker that they've been interested in. But yeah, they would likely either keep Darnold and trade the pick in this scenario under Urban previously shown interest in Darnold and then draft Justin Fields?
So there's two things. First of all, I don't think. First of all, Urban Meyer didn't coach. I'm pretty sure. Did he coach Justin Fields the year before?
No, I just think
Okay.
being from a college perspective, Fields being up there, I don't know. I feel like there would be kind of a better work ethic between those two and better connection between those two because they're coming from pretty similar scenarios.
Yeah, but he never coached him. And also the other thing is, I mean, if you're going to bring him in, like I think you could just keep Darnold because I mean,
yeah, that's why I said it works either way.
Right, keep him. He's really young. The bigger problem is I don't know exactly how well a college coach would fare in the New York market. I understand he had really a lot of success at Ohio State, but he's also had some scandals that he's been involved with, but that's just another story. But I'm not 100% sold on the college coach coming in here and fixing a culture with grown men in the NFL, specifically in the New York market, where he's going to get questioned 24/7 and be on the front pages of the New York Post or Daily News, whatever you have.
Completely understandable. I think New York needs some sort of figure, some sort of just head of what's going on there in New York. There needs to be changes everywhere. And I think Urban Meyer would be someone that would be able to handle the New York media more so than some of the Arthur Smiths, Eric Bieniemys, even though that they have been experienced.
The other thing is
I would go with Bieniemy personally.
The other thing is I don't think he would have interest in the Jets personally if they even offered him the job. I think he's destined to go to Jacksonville. But go ahead, CJ.
Yeah, personally, here's my plan. Now, I'm no coach or GM, but it's safe to say any of us could probably do better than the clown show that is the New York Jets. Now, consider. I would say you keep Sam Darnold because he has shown flashes. Now, who's a guy who has worked with a really good quarterback? Personally, I'd take Eric Bieniemy, a coordinator, but also a name. Now, number two, this is an interesting one. Now, honestly, this is going to be a bit of a stretch, but imagine if you traded that, an interdivisional trade with Miami. You could take both their first round picks and throw in like a fourth rounder for the second overall pick, and give Miami that. Or if not, I would actually draft LSU's Jamar Chase. That kid is a monster, and he opted out, which means he's got a year without hits on his body. And also in the second round, there should be like decent linebackers available, like Galloway, who's where he went escapes me, or maybe Kwity Paye from Michigan on the D line.
Why would the Jets take someone that hasn't played a year, so they don't know exactly what he's playing?
Because Jamar Chase is the best receiver in college ball, probably that.
He hasn't played a whole season.
A whole year without wear and tear on his body. And kid is a monster. He can juke, he can make you miss, he can catch the ball, he's got great hands. I mean, why wouldn't you take him?
I wouldn't take him second overall if he hasn't played a whole year.
Okay, then maybe trade back a bit. I mean, but my point is you need receiving help, or maybe later in the second round, if he's still there, get Shuba Hubbard from Oklahoma State for a running back.
I personally don't even take Jamar Chase at all. I think a year without play, yes, it's a year with hits on his body, but it's also a year without play. And the coaching difference between LSU from last year to this year is pretty drastic. LSU didn't really have much progress this season, so I'm not sure how much Jamar Chase would have fared out this season. However, you still have Devontae Smith. I'm not saying take him second overall.
Yeah, well, yeah, he's definitely not worth a second overall pick. I'd say just trade back. My point is the Jets' number one concern should be get Bieniemy and then build around Darnold.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's Jamar Chase, maybe it's Devontae Smith, I don't know, but they need to draft a young receiver to help grow alongside him.
I guess this is just a question out of curiosity. Reed and Brett, do you both take Devontae Smith over Jamar Chase?
I would.
Interesting. Okay.
Fair enough. What about you, Ben?
I would take Jamar Chase easily.
I just don't.
I won't say easily, but
I don't see a team going ahead of a guy that has played this season and taking someone that hasn't played. From what I've seen with how teams evaluate prospects, they go off tape, and someone that hasn't played a whole year, I just don't see that how a team would take that ahead of.
Completely understandable. I think that someone will get a steal. If Jamar Chase falls to like the end of the first round, even leaks into the second, that's going to be an unbelievable steal for a team.
It kind of feels like the Michael Porter situation in the NBA. Granted, he was injured, and that also cost him games. But that's just the way the draft kind of goes around with the prospects. He'll just drop into the draft.
Yeah,
Possible.
All right, so that's all we got for you today. For Brett Chaves and CJ and Ben Pope, I'm your host, Reed Becker. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time right here on Views from the Booth.